All right. Well, welcome to the Spencer Leonard Hour. These days, every podcast that I do gets the special introduction because I'm stuck in Colorado Springs. And so just to be able to record anything is a special event. Um, but Spencer, I'm glad to talk to you again. And this week, we're going to talk about the thing that everyone's been talking about for about a decade. It's the one figure that dominates American and I think world politics. And I'm kind of tired of talking about him, but we have to. We're going to talk about Trump and fascism and the way he's cracking down on the left and how people like you and I who are leftists should consider this political moment. Um, that's what I'm hoping you can help clarify, and maybe you can talk me off a ledge. But anyway, Spencer, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, I'm Spencer Leonard. Good to see you, Doug. I'm sure that long ago your teachers recognized that you were special.
I didn't get shunted into any of the special programs, but I wasn't given the of what I'm sure you had, which is a gifted and talented stamp of approval. But anyway, go ahead.
I was thinking more like the artistic program.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's amazing. Of course, as part of Platypus, but also as a South Asianist, I follow news from all over the world. And it's incredible how Trump is the only thing the world can talk about. You get it in like the Indian news, like in the most minor stuff, like the most seemingly obscure domestic stuff. And my friends will, who live in India, they'll post about Trump, right? They have a prime minister who, a party in power for a long time now, for 10 years or so now, that was formed as part of the Fascist International. I mean, it was formed in the 1920s as part of out of admiration for Mussolini, and their party is broadly speaking associated with the assassination of Gandhi, and this is who's in power, but they're talking about Trump because of course they can't talk about their domestic politics. And in a sense, the free speech that we still have in the United States means that all there is to talk about is the United States. It's very bizarre that way. Yeah, I think that we want to talk about the designation of Antifa as a terrorist organization, what the hell that even means. You mentioned the crackdown on the left. I can't remember if last time we talked about the killing, I'm not going to say the assassination, the killing of Charlie Kirk. I'm not, it's unclear. An assassination would seem to me like a planned and political act on the part of a group. We live in an age where there's no organizations anywhere. Antifa sort of falls into that category itself. But this is a kid who seems to have been radicalized in Discord chat groups that weren't dedicated to politics, but were sort of affinity groups. But can't remember if we talked about it or not, but at any rate, in the wake of that, it's been attributed, and this is definitely a stretch, to quote Antifa or anti-fascist tendencies. And I don't remember the specific executive order, but an executive order has been issued that I think in its scope specifies, it's that the government is going to go after anti-Christian, anti-American, and anti-capitalist groups. In on the one hand, that sounds very ominous,
Mm-hmm.
and on the other hand, why should the left be anti-Christian, anti-American, or anti-capitalist? In that way, I think it's definitely a kind of a reckoning with, especially a word like anti-capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
invokes really the whole history of the left in our lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
It harkens back to the anti-globalization movement, and I think that it's a real reckoning with anti-politics. I on the one hand, it feels like it's like from the Wayback Machine. It's a blast from the past. And on the other hand, it feels like it's a reckoning with the last 10 years, in particular. Ever since Trump was elected, remind it, I don't know when you started. I'd never heard the phrase antifa apart from like reference to like German tendencies until 2017.
Oh, I had.
Yeah.
I believe. Oh, well, maybe I'm conflating some things, but there was a black bloc at protests
Right.
against the war in Afghanistan and the invasion of Iraq.
Yep.
That I was introduced to at that time when I was about 30, 31, and part of the peace movement in Portland. So, and that was, in my mind, conflated. I conflated that with Antifa. I'm not sure exactly when, but it seemed to me that Antifa was about a set of tactics.
I mean, it's definitely, I think Antifa is, broadly speaking, anarchist.
Right.
And, obviously those old black bloc groups were that.
Mm-hmm.
And, they both share this infatuation with direct action.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I
and,
mean, in 2002, the big debate within the Portland Peaceful Response Coalition was whether or not there would be a diversity of tactics allowed at protests. In other words, would the Portland Peaceful Response Coalition allow for the Black Bloc to do illegal things without trying to police them and stop them ourselves internally? And it was voted that we would. The
that you would
police,
allow it.
we would allow it. We would allow. There was enough of an anarchist contingency within the leadership of PPRC that we allowed the diversity of tactics to be acceptable. Of course,
Did that not cause difficulty in being able to organize marches and the like?
ultimately, it was more of a formal decision than a real practical one. Like there weren't many. What there was a there was some drummers that would show up and people who would wear masks and things like that, but there wasn't a lot of vandalism at the PPRC organized events, which were fairly small protests.
Mm-hmm.
And then by the time that the protest movement really got going, after the big, I forget the date now, but there was one that was international where everyone showed up in the streets. It was millions of people. And Answer became the national leadership of the peace movement around that time. And so at that point, it didn't really matter what PPRC decided to do. But the thing was that debate about the diversity of tactics superseded a debate about what were our political aims. That we never developed any real political aims. It was always about expressing a desire for peace rather than having a political agenda of any kind, reformist or otherwise. So,
right. Which is to say, it was, and this we used to kind of take for granted. It was part of the movement. And the movement was, by default, a wing of the Democrats. However, shamefacedly.
yeah.
Or dishonestly. I think that really came to a fore, came to a certain head. I mean, I remember all the same things. I mean, I remember in 2008, talking to Black Bloc anarchist kids in Ithaca, New York, where I was living. They wanted to protest the Republican convention. And, they really wanted to get it, and they wanted to fight the police.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember asking them, why aren't you demonstrating against the Democrats? I mean, those are the people that you want to get elected, but you don't want, these candidates. And of course, they weren't going to protest against Obama in 2008. And then in 2012, Platypus went on, I remember Chris and I, with a bunch of young Platypus kids, went to whatever they called it, the G7 or the G8 summit in Chicago. And, it was heavily policed. The police were out in riot gear and gas masks, and young people were starting to organize to fight the police then. And Chris and I got the hell out, and of course others, having no desire to engage in that, they started to smash windows. And back then the city of Chicago was not going to put up with it. I know, since then they've put up with a great deal in terms of rioting. And, obviously since 2017, back then it was, as I said before, I thought of it as anarchists, as irresponsible people, as people who were politically unserious, people who wanted, to have the kind of psychological satisfaction of fighting the man, all of which I, felt was infantile, and just, liberals losing their minds. Since 2017, it has taken on, at least in my consciousness, more of, an anti-fascist character. I don't remember. I mean, yes, I've heard people call Mitt Romney a fascist, and of course, I've heard them call George W. Bush a fascist. But that wasn't widespread, and it certainly wasn't tolerable within the Democratic Party. It wasn't taken up in any way within the Democratic Party. Whereas,
under Bush, I think it was, but I mean, I remember, at least in the peace movement, there were like, caricatures of Bush with the little Hitler mustache. A friend of mine painted Mussolini, Hitler, and then Bush on a mural. And I believed he was fascist back then because of the Patriot Act and the way in which people were being labeled enemy combatants, and then the exposure of the torture regimes under Bush. All of that to me spelled fascist. It unfortunately it probably didn't really, but the point is, I do think that for a time, George W. Bush was considered the most authoritarian, most threatening, least competent, worst president in history on the left.
Right. But I guess I feel like, the language that like we're losing our democracy, or democracy's on the ballot, you know, that, because the Democrats were down with the war, right? They were never like squarely against George W. Bush's policies, and they certainly weren't, squarely against the Patriot Act.
No.
And and so like, in our subculture we could say whatever, radical sounding rhetoric we wanted to engage in, but it wasn't being echoed in mainstream society.
True. That is true.
Right.
Yeah.
In 2017, right, it was, they
Yes.
have taken over,
It
and
felt like all of my friends from the Portland Peaceful Response Coalition now were running the Democratic Party and saying exactly what we used to say then, only from the center of the party. And not about everything, but about a lot. And yeah, it was kind of crazy to see what was far left rhetoric become mainstream centrist Democratic Party talking points. The way in which the Democratic Party embraced identity politics and there's about the patriarchy and all of that. It was
intersectionality.
That was all far left, Andrea Dworkin style, some of it rhetoric that now is like Elizabeth Warren's ideology. It was that was a change for sure.
Right. And so I was living here in Virginia in 2017 during, at the time of the Unite the Right rally. But prior to that, we'd already, the patriarchy had come into power. So we had the Pussy Hat March on Washington, right? And that was just openly Democrats. The Democrats, were the organizers and took part in it. There were Congress people, elected officials in the march. But then the idea that, the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville somehow represented Trump, right? Obviously there are, far right groups in the United States, and they were definitely, they definitely descended upon Charlottesville in August 2017. But, what in the world that had to do with the election of Donald Trump was another matter, right? In Donald Trump, they obviously thought, because they were experiencing the crisis in American politics, they were experiencing the kind of frisson, the kind of, churning of American society. They had this rally, but that is the Republican Party, or somehow the margin of victory, I knew at the time was absurd. And it had to do with, obviously Democrats' refusal to come to terms with the failures of the Obama presidency. Why on earth the Democrats deserved, a second term, much less a third term with Obama, right? And you couldn't address that. Of course, Sanders didn't address it. Sanders expressed the discontent in the Democratic Party, but he never said it had anything to do with Obama, right? That, he was somehow running against Obama's manifest successor, Hillary Clinton, and yet he, wouldn't talk about the disappointments of the previous 8 years and the bailing out of Wall Street and all the rest of it, and the continuation of the wars, and so with Charlottesville, which I think the Democrats allowed, it was, Democrats all the way down, Democrat mayor, Democrat police chief, Democrat governor who ran, whose Virginia Bureau of Investigation definitely knew exactly the kind of people who were coming to Charlottesville.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never seen the police let people, brandish weapons and fight each other in the street like that. It was a test run for other
That
things.
happened a lot, by the way. It happened in Portland again and again. There'll be these street battles that happened. That was like in 2017. It was after Charlottesville. You'd have these organizations like the Proud Boys and Patriot Prayer come into town, and then the Antifa people would show up to fight them.
Right.
And the thing is, I do agree that the Proud Boys and the Patriot Prayer people don't represent the center of the Republican Party. But I also would say the Antifa people don't represent the center of the Democratic Party either.
Sure.
But I do think it's probably true that the Proud Boys and the Patriot Prayer people were the shock troops of the Republican Party, and the Antifa is the shock troops of the Democratic Party. And that one way we could conceive of what Trump is doing is he's doing exactly what Biden did, only in reverse, trying to use the power of the state to suppress political speech because it's a way to go after his political enemies. And that is the other major party to try to suppress the Democratic Party, marginalize the Democratic Party. And I do think if you scratch one of these nonprofits or NGOs that are progressives and radical, you're going to find foundation money and State Department money and Tides Foundation money, and it's all going to be part of the nexus of Democratic Party NGO power, ultimately. So when he's talking about fighting Antifa, he is talking about going after the militant, violent portions of the Democratic Party.
I guess I'm less prepared. I don't think the Republicans have a activist wing on anything like the depth and scale that the Democrats do. It goes back to what I was saying before about the movementism, which was really a tacit division of labor on the left that ceded the political space, ceded the political ground to the Democrats in ways that were, again, sort of shamefaced and semi-dishonest, especially given the failure to form a socialist party in the 1960s and 70s. And so instead, the story became that the legacy of the civil rights movement and other things that obviously weren't the Democrats, especially the civil rights movement, more debatable around the anti-Vietnam War movement. Nevertheless, was so it was viewed that there was this continuity in the counterculture that somehow wasn't like just Bill Clinton or before that Jimmy Carter or whatever, but really it was, right? If you talk to those people, right, they were very upset about Ronald Reagan. It was Ronald Reagan, right? And it was the end of the world if the Republicans won. And in fact, they were always going to come around and say you had to vote for a Democrat. And it was better for us when the Democrats are in office, all this kind of crap, right? Whereas the Republicans are like, whatever. They're like a bunch of voters. They're not, like, okay,
well, what
they
about
have links to churches and things like that.
Yeah, I was going to say, what about the evangelical churches and the big mega churches and
It's not
and
even really like a machine, though, in the way that the Democrats are, and that's the Republicans have looser ties to civil society than the Democrats do. It's one of the reasons why the Democrats run the big cities. Um, so I think that, and I don't think that the Republicans, espouse or defend, say the Proud Boys. You won't really hear that on like Fox News. It's simply that, look, these people have a right to organize. People have a right to get enthusiastic. People have a right to do whatever. And, they're not for the other team. But if they break the law, right? And I think that's, much more the spirit of the Republican Party. It's it's the local chambers of commerce. It's realtors. It's farmers. It's, isolated individuals fed up with the nanny state, or, they're hectoring teachers or whatever. I think it's a much looser electoral, phenomenon than the Democrats are. And, on MSNBC, the people be like, well, what are you talking about? How can you be against anti-fascism? It's right there in the name, right? Who's not anti-fascist? We fought an anti-fascist war, right? They will just say it, right? And I remember my friends, my Democrat friends, college friends, and again in 2017, right, there was that meme of Richard Spencer getting punched, right, on camera, right, and it was like, punch a Nazi, and they were like, well, this is what we've been for all along, because we listened to the Clash and we listened to the Dead Kennedys, and this is, we've always been anti-fascist, right? And it's always been in this kind of subcultural rock and roll.
Even before that, Woody Guthrie had a guitar, right? That written on it was, "This guitar kills fascists.
This machine kills fascists."
This machine kills fascists. Yeah.
Right. I mean, but obviously that's like a Stalinist, Popular Front thing, right? That's what Woody Guthrie is, a communist, or fellow traveler, and whatever, singing songs about the international brigades in the Spanish Civil War, and of course translating that into pro-Soviet, anti-Hitler People's War line. After
Seeger,
Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, Pete Seeger would be another one that kind of was
right. And again, it's all it all has to do with the liquidation of the left. And the unseriousness of these right? Like,
some of them are my heroes, though. I like Pete Seeger. I like Phil Oakes. Do you know who Phil Oakes?
Sure.
Was? Yeah,
of course.
Big fan of Phil Oakes. Even Bob Dylan, who was not really ultimately a part of all this, but that whole the whole new left 60s countercultural thing definitely shaped what I thought the left was when I was
no doubt
young.
Me too. Probably more than say Chris, who's more allergic to that sort of stuff. But I came to my sense of Marxism by processing that stuff and realizing the big lie at the heart of it. Right. And especially the way it was memorialized and sort of monumentalized in the 80s. When its failure, the refusal to confront its failure was consolidated in effectively recruiting our generation to it. Gen X wasn't really able to like refashion the landscape of the left. It just sort of staffed it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, yeah, but so we had that legacy, and it does, impact like the Republicans. It does, right? They too, think that like they're going to be, a movement or whatever, like with Trump, obviously, like this is the biggest, most beautiful movement in American history, right? Like, but, really for Trump, it's about, him, his rallies, his defeat of the Republican Party, right? It's not about, and it's about putting the evangelicals to bed as much as anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not about like mobilizing them. It's just saying like, go back to church,
Mm-hmm.
right? We'll handle this.
This is Trump said during the last election, this is the last time you'll need to vote to the evangelicals. This time matters. And then you don't, I'm going to make everything so perfect you won't even have to vote anymore. That was his
well, my favorite was the Bible's my favorite book.
Right.
And
like you
okay, I know that last time you saw me, I was this decadent guy on TV, and that before that I was at the Playboy Mansion with another wife, right? I mean, remember, like it used to be that you like Newt Gingrich couldn't run for president because he'd gotten a divorce.
Right. But
right. And now here's like Trump with his trophies, like whatever.
Yeah, but Newt Gingrich did that
in
a really slimy way. I don't know. Trump probably did too, but Gingrich divorced his wife while she was dying of cancer. It was horrible. But yeah.
But the point is that Trump is obviously not a standard bearer for evangelical Christianity. Right.
They asked him, what's your favorite book of the Bible or favorite passage from the Bible? And he was like, oh, I just like all of it. I can't pick out a favorite. I just like it all.
Right. So yeah. Obviously like these things do morph, under Trump, and there is a contempt for normal people and normal, and widespread, diffuse religious life of America in the Democratic Party. And, throwing around phrases like, Christian fascist, which, people hear as Christians are fascists, just like if they hear Islamofascist as Muslims are fascist. And, a lack of respect for the fact that, even a lot of people who don't go to church, they don't want to hear it disrespected. They grew up, whatever, their mom and I think that the Democrats have become, more that way. And so, sure, those people are voting Republican, perhaps in greater numbers. And Charlie Kirk definitely spoke to that. He was, very forthcoming about his Christianity. But, largely what they mean by Christian is just like law-abiding bourgeois. You hear people now like talking about like the politics of, like the belief, like the Christians and the godless, right? And all they mean by that is like people who uphold, like whatever, obeying the law, right? Versus those who don't, right? Or people who don't, who don't think that, we should have sexual reassignment surgeries for 14-year-olds. Right? Whatever extreme view. I'm not trying to say, I'm not trying to adjudicate those questions. I'm just saying that, like commonplace views are, treated as though they're exotic. And
Yeah, well,
normal,
one view
like
that I
if you
think,
wanted the working class's support, you just simply would not attack these things. They would be indifferent,
yeah,
right?
one thing that I think that Christians mean when they say they're Christian is that the man should be the provider for his family, and have be the head of the household. I think that is a Christian perspective in America right now. Would you disagree with that? That's kind of what's meant, like a so for the nuclear family, for more traditional roles within the family, and
Maybe, but definitely, dignity of labor.
yeah,
I don't, I know, I would say that, there are an immense number of Republican working women, um, and proud working women.
mm-hmm,
And, certainly Donald Trump is going to say that. Donald Trump is going to say that there should be, that whatever the merit of women must be recognized. And, women are, massive part of the American workforce,
mm-hmm.
et cetera. He's not going to say that women should leave the workforce.
No, it's more about the men being in it than it is
Yeah.
about women not being in it. It's about men have to go out, they have to be
Well, it's a
fathers.
very common working class view, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That men without jobs are losers,
Right,
right? That's hardly like a extreme position.
right, right,
Like that's the experience of most men, right?
right.
Like
Mm-hmm.
most men, don't want to not have a job and live in their parents' basement. And obviously part of
That right now that cuts deep what you're just saying, Spencer, because I'm here in my old room living in my parents' house, but it's short term. But anyway, go ahead.
right, but that kind of thing, it came up in during COVID, when people started having their jobs taken away. And I remember, an interview in Michigan where there was one of the earliest anti-lockdown demonstrations, and reporter sticks a microphone in the face of this, rural woman or woman from a small town in Michigan. And she says, my husband has always worked. His father has always worked. His father always worked. We've never taken a check, from the government.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And, who are
Working
they?
class people don't even like unemployment insurance. They feel ashamed about getting that.
Well, that's what she was saying.
Yeah, I know. It's crazy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the technocrats are like, look, we're going to pay your bills for you. So what are you so upset about? Right. And it's like, look, I am my ability to work is not contingent on you. Right. You make the world impossible for me to find a decent job. Right.
Right.
You members of the ruling class. And here I am, struggling to survive. And that's the source of my dignity. Right. So what are you talking about? Right. It's not a privilege. Right. The ability to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
It's I mean, you could say it really sucks not to be able to do it,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't take it away. Right now. So that's all I'm saying is that, a lot of it is just basic bourgeois working class, impulses.
Mm-hmm.
That have no other outlet in our politics, right? That the Democrats, to a degree, have lost touch with, and a part of that is, law and order, right?
Right.
A respect for the law, right? I mean, I don't know if you were, I definitely was told by my father, it doesn't matter if you don't like the laws. You still have to follow them. Right. And you can organize in this country and you can conduct politics and you can try to change the law. But you have to respect the fact that all these other people are following the law.
Yeah. See,
and you're a member of society.
My dad had a radar detector in his car.
Uh-huh.
You know what I mean?
I know, but like I had been caught shoplifting.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Mm.
And, I had some ridiculous, pseudo rebellion attitude that, this was victimless crime, right?
Mm.
These are just some, big corporation, right? Nobody's really losing. Right. And, my father just said, like, look, you got to walk through life without looking over your shoulder, right? You have to be able to, like, be a member of society and be able to relate to other people. And you won't be able to do that if you're like sketchy, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And this gets to the heart of the issue,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the heart of the issue is immigration right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? And the Democrats were in power and they didn't pass an immigration bill. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wants to pass an immigration bill, in fact, because nobody's going to win with an immigration bill.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, the only person who can is Trump. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I won't prophesy, but I wouldn't be surprised if Trump passed an immigration bill as the kind of end of the ICE raids. Because I don't think that he can deport everybody. I don't think ultimately there's a stomach for it in the United States. I think a lot of people talked about it as almost like a kind of taboo violation. Yeah, deport them all.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But can you fucking deport millions of people? Right. Dignified people, working people, people who are living in your neighborhood, people who are contributing to society, people who are essentially unoffensive. What are you talking about? This is some ugly shit. And it's already really ugly.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it looks extremely illiberal with these masked agents of the state just spiriting people away with, the flimsiest of due process.
Yeah.
But obviously they were, they were able to like focus on the worst of the worst. And there aren't actually nearly as many stories of atrocities committed by the state as I thought there would be by this point. But there's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to look far to find them
Mm-hmm.
online. But the Democrats created this fucking situation because they just said, oh, immigration law, that's ridiculous. Nobody's illegal.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's an unserious position in capitalist politics. I mean, you could try to address that at the level of socialist politics, at the level of popular organizing, and as I understand it, the campaign's trying to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But that would have to be combined with an entire class independence.
Mm-hmm.
Right. As soon as you're saying, like, I want to administer capitalism, right? The Democrats and the Republicans, that's what they're trying to do. That's what their politics is struggling over, is control of the capitalist state.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're trying to say, and then you turn around and say, well, America's not going to enforce its immigration laws. Every other country, every other capitalist state will, but not us. That's so manifestly absurd.
Right.
Right. And that's what they did. And so, Trump, I mean, I think Trump's winning on all these things. I'm not so convinced that that he's losing support with these things, because I think it just, more and more people are having that conversation. Like, how did we do that? How did Biden not like stop any of this stuff? Look at all these criminals, right? Look at these gangs, this sex trafficking, these drugs. Trump is winning. He's dominating the conversation.
Yeah, but when he does this thing where he's saying, if you hold these political perspectives, if you are aligned with these ideologies, you will be targeted by the state.
It's manifestly unconstitutional.
Right.
That
is a repeat of what happened since Trump was elected, and really it happened again and again under Bush and Clinton and further back than that. But yeah, I do think that he will lose some support from the activist parts of the Republican Party, the opinion makers. Like I think he's losing Tucker Carlson to a degree over this kind of stuff. Not maybe around Antifa particularly, but because with Antifa you can say we're going to go after them for their political crimes, and and I don't know if that will really hold up, but they do commit acts of like look, it held up under Clinton. They targeted ecological terrorists like Earth First as a terrorist organization because they would go and like put sugar into the tanks of bulldozers or
Sure.
commit other types of acts of vandalism against the timber industry, and
I
so
mean, look, the state has always done this, right? It's always been, certainly in our lifetimes, they've infiltrated the KKK or whatever groups, right? And the idea is that, these groups are conspiring to commit crimes. That's the cover,
mhm.
right? But yeah, it does cross the line over into thought crime. But white supremacy,
Oh, I know.
right? What are we talking about, right? I mean, in my own, the textbook that I teach sociology from, it just says in the section on race, if you claim not to see race, right? People who say that they're colorblind are engaged in colorblind racism. And probably they oppose welfare and healthcare for poor people, and et cetera. In other words, like if you just say, like, look, I take people as they come, and I don't worry about whether they're black or white.
Mm-hmm.
That's a supreme expression of racism, according to according to a sociology textbook today. Right?
When was that textbook printed?
Oh, this is totally 2025,
Oh, wow.
totally current, totally of the present. And it's, and I picked the book because it's least ideological, right? It's least insane Democrat, right? Like it's all like these people completely believe their own bullshit, right? And so, white supremacy, right? For them, like everybody's guilty of it, right? Anybody who says that they don't see race, it's like when you hear these liberals say, well, everybody's racist, right?
Well, that was as far back as the 90s. That was
it's commonplace amongst liberals, right? And of course, my response is speak for yourself. And that's a common working class attitude, extremely common working class attitude. Right. Why are you calling me racist? I take people as they are, right? I work with all kinds of people. Of course, I'm friends with all kinds of people, right? But if you're not down with the Democrats' crazy, affirmative action and racialized policies, then you are a white supremacist. Right. And this is the number one domestic threat that the FBI is going to pursue, right, under Biden.
But that's all changed now.
But I'm just saying that, it was thought crime.
Yeah, I know.
Right. And it's totally the equivalent of saying anti-Christian, anti-American, anti-capitalist.
So we have to oppose it when it is targeting those supposedly our ideological enemies, and we have to oppose it when it's opposing our supposed ideological friends. In reality, who our ideological friends are and who our ideological enemies are is not so clear. Certainly, if you're someone who, like Ta-Nehisi Coates, is really not my ideological friend, right? He's just not, but. Neither is Gavin McInnes, and I have to protect them both or stand up for them both. But the question is how to do so today. And there is
or we have to
feeling that the best thing to do would be to get these people out there and fight in the streets and put up a show of force in resistance to Trump. And another way, one I'm more sympathetic to is it's time for everyone to burn an American flag, because you can get thrown in jail for it now apparently. So let's get that adjudicated, something like that. But what do you think about how we should oppose these moves?
I think that we should teach people on the left to observe the effects of total liquidation into the Democratic Party. Right? And to understand that, if what Donald Trump is doing is illiberal, as no doubt it is, right? Obviously, all that I'm trying to do is defend like the liberal common sense of the working class, and to say that socialists should be there to point out the way that the state violates its own laws, its own professions.
Mm-hmm.
The state obviously claims to uphold and to be founded on the Constitution, right?
Mm-hmm.
But neither of these political parties give a damn about that. They don't give a damn about the right of free speech. They don't give a damn about due process of law or any other the right to assembly. Of course, these things are under assault. Of course, Trump is assaulting them.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm not trying to apologize for Trump. I'm simply saying he's just using the Democrats' playbook.
Yeah.
Right? And what we should say is you can't stand aloof from this inside the Democrats. You can't stand aloof from it and then say you have to vote for the Democrats. The attempt of Jacobin Magazine, because Jacobin Magazine didn't endorse all this lunacy by Biden.
Right.
It just kept silent.
Or would critique it, but would endorse
behind a paywall.
Right.
It's absurd, right? And they're going to go and tell us that Zoran Mamdani's election is going to be some big turning point, right? 12 years down the road or 10 years down the road from the Sanders campaign, from AOC, etc. All of these things are obviously not kickstarting socialism in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
What they're doing is they're recruiting, really what the spread of anti-fascism was, this new anarchism, it's akin to the new neo-Stalinism, in as much as both of them are rejecting the DSA's espousal of the Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
Right, the mainstream phenomenon of liquidation into the Democrats created two counter reactions on the left. One is neo-Stalinism, and the other is this new anarchism.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and none of it's adequate, and it's all bound up together. Right, it's not separate crimes being committed. These people are all in a conspiracy to prevent socialism in the United States.
One thing that we should remember also, and I agree with you completely.
If I can be a little, it's obviously not a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy of fools. Go ahead.
Right. Well, I don't know. It's weird. I do think that there's with the new anarchism, which, by the way, to me seemed very much like the anarchism I knew from the 80s on. Right. But what it seems to me is like it comes in and out of style, this neo-anarchism. And we should recall that Black Lives Matter was, just like Occupy before it, dominated by anarchism. It was organized, the radical parts of Black Lives Matter, especially in the Northwest.
Obviously.
But overall, it was an anarchist movement. There was the temporary autonomous zone in Seattle that was a matter of seizing I think a police station and some blocks in
Well, that's why
Seattle.
I'm talking about racism and white supremacy, because this is
That's
what
right.
authorizes this anarchism in America. Go
Right.
ahead.
Yeah. No. So, but the thing is, at the time, Black Lives Matter was obviously also a very important project within the center of the Democratic Party and running all the way through most of corporate
Well, especially
America.
George Floyd,
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter
2020.
2.0.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
That was the one where it was truly anarchist. There was and the most radical.
Michael Brown BLM was a protest against the Obama administration.
Right. Different, completely different. But when it was about Trump, it was dominated by anarchists, and it was, and not all, it was either like Democratic Party, campus-bound activists, when they had the most money and the most power, and then there was a anarchist communist faction, and they're the ones who like seized land in Seattle for a little while. They're the ones who were breaking windows. They're the ones that tried to keep the riots going. They're the ones that dominated in downtown Portland for a while. And it was a matter of teaching tactics as well as actual like having the real live anarchists on the ground. It was a matter of like perpetuating a particular approach. But all of that, was really just the work of the Democrats to opportunistically capitalize on the failures of capitalist politics around 2020 and during the pandemic, and taking real dissent against the conditions of the pandemic and transforming it into something that was politically operative for the Democratic Party. And
It was very transparent.
yeah.
Racism is a medical issue, right? It's a medical epidemic, and so it's okay if people don't wear masks and go out into the streets and congregate and spread this infection that otherwise requires us to shut down society.
The very mayor in Portland that was enforcing the lockdowns went out to the Black Lives Matter protest and gave a speech.
Right.
It just. Yeah.
Right. And obviously, these people just lie, right? The whole thing is predicated on lies. Of course, the police kill people across race, right? If they disproportionately kill Black people, they kill fewer than the number of police encounters with people that they're arresting for felonies would imply. Roland Fryer has done this research. You can see him discuss it online. If there's racism in policing, it's much clearer in non-lethal situations. That, in fact, is well known. Black people commit 50% of the murders in the United States. And of course, that means that they're arrested in large numbers as violent criminals who face serious sentences. And yet the number who get killed by the cops is considerably less than that. And they lied about George Floyd, right, who had fentanyl in his system. I mean, the level of the demagogy. Are these talking points right-wing talking points? No, they are not right-wing talking points. They are factual talking points. And we live in a world where if you challenge the Democrats' narrative, you are supposedly, this is how stupid the world that we live in is. You can't talk. And of course, what is the whole point of it? The whole point is DEI for middle-class people and admissions into Harvard. Right? It's not about rebuilding American cities or addressing unemployment in American cities or schools in American cities, which are all completely abysmal. Right? And that's where, if you want to talk about the school to prison pipeline, right? Just talking about that, I mean, these people will talk about it like the problem is the 13th Amendment. right? I don't know if you saw that crazy documentary right? The 13th Amendment is about, authorizing mass incarceration of black people. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. And it is passed by the most revolutionary Congress the United States has ever known.
Mm-hmm.
The Reconstruction Congress, which far exceeds anything we've ever seen in terms of revolutionary spirit,
Mm-hmm.
right? That was forged in the Civil War,
Mm-hmm.
right? The reason people go to prison out of American cities is because it's total degradation of society. It's absolutely rotten, morbid symptoms of capitalism that we take for granted as the status quo in every major American city, with gangs, with drugs, with violence, with wretched schools, with lack of employment. And the Democrats aren't going to do a fucking thing about that.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to do anything about that. They administer this. And in fact, Trump will at least say he will say black unemployment has fallen. He said that when he tried to get reelected in 2020. Look at the unemployment numbers for minorities. And he said we should invest in America and rebuild American cities, which would involve such a massive amount of money.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The Democrats never even mentioned this. They passed their Green New Deal. Right? What did they do for American cities? Nothing. Right? So it's just bullshit, right? It literally is like we're going to die on, the American Supreme Court is racist because it strikes down affirmative action at Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They never asked the question, well, what if we lived in a world where black people didn't need affirmative action? They were just as competitive as anyone else because they had, the same kind of lives and the same kind of incomes and the same kind of schools as everybody else. Like, obviously, they're not going to do that. So that's mendacious, right? The level of mendacity that Trump is responding to, the reason why Republicans will forgive him for attacking Antifa and attacking universities and attacking pro-Palestinian demonstrators is because they sense the level of mendacity around these issues in the Democratic Party. And that's just a fact. Right? It's a testimony to the wisdom of the American people, even though the same wisdom is going to cause them to balk at the illiberalism of it.
Yeah. And this is where I feel that we have to, walk a fine line where we it's not that difficult though. You would protect the rights of the KKK to march, and you would.
It's not that difficult.
Right. So you would also protect the rights of the
who would do it, Doug? Who would do it? The ACLU.
The ACLU, exactly.
And what happened to the ACLU? They lost their shit over Charlottesville.
They did, not only over that, but also the trans issue was a big. There was they call for a book to be banned around that issue
because the Democrats convinced them that their bourgeois liberalism, their basic straight liberalism, their constitutional liberalism was racist. I mean, that's it. They folded, right?
Yeah.
They just folded. And so now you have like FIRE or whatever, right? Some other organization. But, an immense historical legacy that was built by socialism, right? The ACLU was built by socialists, right? It was lost. And how was it lost? It lost its independence in civil society and succumbed to the Democrats. Bullshit. And everyone is a loser, right? And young people have no idea what what you're like when you say it's very simple. You and I know it's very simple.
Right.
It's obviously simple. You just defend the rights of the Unite the Right to have their rally in Charlottesville, just like you defended the right of the American Nazi Party to have their rally in Skokie, Illinois, in whatever that was, 1979. Right? And then you expect the police to enforce the law.
Right. And you defend the rights of Black Bloc and Antifa and Mothers Against the War and Greta Thunberg and anybody else who wants to organize protests as well. And obviously they cannot be targeted for their ideology. That just cannot stand. But unfortunately, the reality is since at least 9/11 and actually well before, political groups have been targeted for the ideology again and again and again, and just shifts around as to how and why. And what I was hoping was that there would be a backfooting of all this stuff after Trump got elected, because his people and his movement have been targeted by the state for the suppression of political speech. And what I have to accept now is that there has been no back. The movement to suppress civil society has not been stalled with the election of Trump.
Look, it's demagogic politics. When you look at this executive order, it's, something 7, like HPSM 7 or something about Antifa. This is not a serious state document, right? This is not a policy that could actually guide law enforcement. It's manifestly unconstitutional, right? Obviously, you can advocate the overthrow of the government. You can't really distinguish in law the desire to get elected or the desire to amend the Constitution from the desire to overthrow the government. Right? How can you fundamentally distinguish, just like revolutionaries can't fundamentally distinguish, like, do we want to come to power through legal parliamentary means? Someone like Karl Marx would say, well, maybe we'll come to power through legal parliamentary means. Maybe the revolution would take that form, right? Because obviously the law allows for revolution in the United States, right? It does. It allows for you to organize a political party and to take power and to change all the laws and to amend the Constitution. You could have an amendment to the Constitution that says that all the old Constitution is abolished and we're going to have a constitutional convention to create a new Constitution, right? There's no limit to the scope of how much you can amend the Constitution. Right. There's no limit to, there are no guardrails.
Right.
On this republic. So obviously there's no such thing as anti-Americanism, right?
Right.
Because anti-American, the potential of the American revolutionary experiment is absolutely open-ended. And the fucking conservative Supreme Court knows it. Clarence Thomas knows it. Right? So Trump the FBI, Kash Patel, Pam Bondi, they know they can't go rounding up people for their beliefs, but they can harass the hell out of people. And they can, what happened to this man who wrote, the Antifa handbook, Mark Bray, right? I don't know if you saw that news. This he's a professor, he's a millennial. He was an anti-fascist. He wrote the book. In it, he talks about doxing people. In my comrade Aaron Haygood's interview with him on his book, he talks about direct action, doxing people. He talks about, illegal things. And he's gotten death threats. He's a professor at Rutgers University in New Jersey. He's
Mhm.
gotten death threats, and he and his family have fled to Spain.
Hmm.
Right? That's not the FBI,
No.
right? But that's, of course, the MAGA Republican fringe feeling empowered, feeling like they have the state behind them.
Hmm.
You know, just like the anti-fascists felt like they had the state behind them, even under Trump, because they treated Trump as illegitimate and a passing sort of flu. You know, the state, American democracy had caught a bug, but we were going to get over it, and we were going to get back to electing Clintons and Obamas to the end of time, right? And they, of course, completely disrupted first term Trump. Trump was never really president first time around. He couldn't do anything. The only thing that he could do was what the mainstream Republicans wanted, like the tax reform.
Hmm.
Um, and so even in 2017, right, that's what all that was about. That's what the Pussy Hat March was about. That's what the Charlottesville freakout was about. That's what Punch a Nazi was about. It was, this is passing. This isn't real. Trump's illegitimate. He's a Russian stooge. Of course, what the impeachment was about, what Russiagate was about, all that shit.
Hmm.
Right? They thought that they had the power of the state behind them. Turns out they don't.
No, and we knew that at the
Right.
time. People knew at the time that this was a massive mistake, but it was very difficult to convince people about that. Listen, we're talking for over an hour. I want to talk to you about history and a time which was maybe more optimistic, even though it was a failure as well, which is the German Revolution of 1918, 1919, the attempt to break the split, the STP, the SPD. And that's what we'll talk about in the parrot room. But I hope
Let me just say one last thing.
I want to say one last thing and then let you talk, which I hope that people didn't take out of this that we are simply a couple of Gen Xers saying, get off my lawn or something like that, because the truth of this moment is that if we are going to actually succeed in protecting the rights of civil society, we will have to do it on a basis other than defending the Democratic Party. And we'll have to do it on the basis other than simply partisan rejection of their opponents. We'll have to try to do it from within civil society itself.
Right. I mean, the point is that this is petty bourgeois hysterics, right? The politics of direct action, the politics of punch a Nazi, the politics of terrorizing a professor at Rutgers University, right? This is the petty bourgeois hysterics of mass democracy. And socialism is about building a different kind of politics. It's not about street demonstrations. It's not about expressing yourself. It's about building the capacities of common people to transform their circumstances and to give them, to build confidence both in themselves and in the wider world that they could actually take responsibility for the course of history. That's the point, right? The point is that, and this is why I just won't apologize. It's not old people ranting. It's not Gen X people ranting, right? It's socialism speaking to capitalist politics. What Luigi Mangione is capitalist politics. What assassinating Charlie Kirk is capitalist politics. What intimidating a professor is capitalist politics. It is it's about perpetuating the status quo. And that's what electing Zoran Mamdani is about. Right? That's the spirit of this conversation. And I just wanted to make it clear, right? What are we talking about? We're talking, this may be the only thing, and this is why we're going to talk about history, right? It's all that people know. It's all that we've ever known is capitalist politics, right? We can only have a sense of something else by understanding a very deep history that, yes, is still in the present, right? It's not merely in the past, but it's extremely difficult to unearth and identify and recognize.
Right. And well, that's what we're going to try to do in the second half. Thank you for talking me through my, jitters as a recovering Democrat.
This petty bourgeois hysterics.
Yeah, that's right. And I will see you in the pet room in just a minute. I'm going to end the recording there.
Thanks, Doug.